So thanks everybody who showed up to not only the conference but also this presentation. There's a handful of different items we want to go through, and there's some slides in here I probably will breeze through. I believe the intent is to make all of these materials available to everyone at the conference. So there's some content in here that may not touch on, but might be good if you care to dive into it later. So a couple different things we want to go through today, and open to questions throughout. Just kind of to start, Ernst Young, most of you may be familiar with us more from a tax or accounting perspective. We have a very large consulting services arm as well, and growing in the digital and data and analytics space. So a few thousand globally, 1,000 or so in the US, ranging competencies from big data architects to PhDs in stats, op research, machine learning, AI focus. So we work with a lot of the vendors that you saw out there to deliver different solutions to our clients in very different manners. So as we go through this, there's a few different things we're going to touch on, some of which is more focused on the analytics strategy. We've done a research study with Forbes that was published that focuses on understanding and determining why and how analytic strategies are successful or not successful, and how to make them successful. And it really gets to understanding the human element of analytics, which we'll get into. We also have a few case studies that we'll walk through at the end, and discuss maybe some of the more recent trends we're seeing at our clients and such. So just kind of diving right into it. Analytics is disrupting everything. The volume of data that's being created obviously is causing complications for companies in the sense that they're trying to get ahead of it, they're trying to learn from it, they're trying to get away from gut feel in decision making and using data and facts to drive that as much as possible. A lot of companies are struggling with capturing value from analytics. So a lot of companies use analytics, they have data lakes, maybe they went really deep in different spaces, but really harnessing the value from it can be a challenge. And so when we talk about the solution being the human element and the analytics purpose, we'll get into what that means, but really it's a focus on understanding how people will react to this. Change management is going to be key. Really having a purpose around it and integrating analytics into your organization versus using it in pockets is going to be critical. And so many companies have analytics organizations in different pockets, maybe centralized, maybe decentralized. And so a lot of this isn't about standing up a new analytics organization. It may be harnessing the value from the one you currently have. So there's a few different things, and what is analytics? I think everyone here probably understands what analytics is, right? It's about starting with business questions. It's about using the data to drive the answer, but not necessarily starting with the data. And so we'll get into this in a little more detail. I think this is one of the slides we'll probably just glance over briefly. So the survey that I mentioned, we've done and conducted with Forbes, and it's been published. So I think if you search for it, the human element of analytics, you can find it on the web. But there was a few key things that came out of this that I think have been found interesting by our clients. Some of which is around 66% of organizations spend over $5 million investing in analytics. And we looked at very different sizes and sectors when doing this study. So a lot of companies are spending a decent amount in this space. Recurring spend as well. They're spending it on technology. They're spending it on people. They're spending it to acquire data. When we look at the next one, only 12% of the organizations included think that they're in a leading class from a maturity model perspective, and that would be the far end of the spectrum. And it may not be that they're not spending. It may not be that they're not investing in technology, investing in data, investing in people. It's that they're not getting the value out of it. And so in order to be leading class, it really means that you're embedding analytics in everything, within your processes, within your technology, et cetera, in order to drive the value. And the biggest issue here, 89% thinks that it's change management that are causing that to occur. People are reluctant to change. People don't understand how to use the analytics to make decisions. Or maybe the analytics were very intellectually stimulating but didn't fit the business problem, which is a common case that we see. And really what this gets to is making sure that, and this is where the human element piece of it comes into, around the change management side of it. So really what we talk about is embedding it in everything that we do, making it part of the culture, making it part of the business. And so emerging technologies, many of you are going to be aware of a lot of these things, but whether we're talking about big data using graph database, whether we're talking about robotics, cyber is a huge thing and a huge trend within the analytics space. Really, it's about restructuring the value chain, enhancing interactions with stakeholders. Many stakeholders may or may not understand how different analytics techniques or technologies may be required to drive the value of an organization. And the enhanced control and risk management is a key piece of this as well. These technologies are great, they can drive a lot of value, but they also open up a lot of risks. Some of our clients are reluctant to use the cloud, even though they know that there's value, scalability, processing, etc., because of the security around it. And so they're coming up with strategies on how they leverage public-private cloud or build new data centers themselves. And so depending on where you are going through this, the strategic purpose starts to come into play. Business strategy with the latest technologies and the human element really start to underpin the analytics and everything we do. And technology doesn't have to be new all the time. A lot of the ways that we're seeing that organizations are embedding analytics into what they're doing is through the use of workflow or process-enabled technologies like Microsoft Dynamics or Pega, and really using machine learning algorithms to drive the process. We'll get into it in a little more detail, but trying to embed the analytics into the process is going to be critical in order to drive the value, because then it's not an analytics dashboard over here and your system over here where you need to go through and make decisions. It's really forcing you and prescribing decisions to be made. When we talk to different companies, and I know some of you may be from a software vendor perspective or an industry perspective, but or consulting as well. But there's a lot of common questions that come up with this, and really, I can skip the questions for now, but from a leading practices perspective, companies that start with the business problem, or organizations, departments that start with the business problem before diving into the data and analytics are really the ones that are going to be leading class and are going to be driving change and adoption. When they focus on the end user, the consumer, it's going to be critical. Just doing analytics to solve a problem is going to maybe lead you to a very interesting solution, maybe a very nice white paper, but it may not be something that drives incremental value. It may not move a metric that drives value, reduces cost, etc. And so that really gets into the next piece around ensuring there is analytics alignment, capabilities, and incentives. So when you're working with an FP&A organization and trying to understand, why is it important that they get better forecast accuracy, or if you're working with supply chain around the demand management, really understanding how that person and how that department is incentivized, as well as how it incentivizes the company, is going to be critical, because people make decisions based on how their organization is viewed, how their department is viewed, and so making sure that there's alignment on what the output of the analytics are going to be is important. And then the last piece is around experiment and measure value, then scale. A lot of organizations want to do analytics, and because they know that there's value out there, or they're doing analytics, but maybe they're not seeing the value in different pieces. So getting in and experimenting is the right framework from our point of view. And this really starts, again, find the business problem, but do a pilot, do a POC. You don't need to go deep into all areas. You don't need to go hire 5 data scientists to do something that may or may not be feasible due to data technology limitations, or simply just due to the organizational change. And so when you start small, you can start to get the momentum and identify the players and the team. Overall, you're really going to want somebody within the business domain that's going to drive the change. So making sure that somebody's willing to act based on the analytics is the other key piece that may not be up here. This starts to get into a little more of the analytics program and the success of it. And so there's 4 key areas here. We can argue if there's more or less, I think, but really, if we look at it, strategy and leadership, organizational capabilities, analytics production, and analytics consumption. So starting at the left with the strategy piece of it, it's important to have a well-defined approach for using analytics, whether it's piloting, then scaling, how you're going to be aligned to the organization, getting into the organizational capabilities. Creating the analytics-driven culture is going to be critical. Individuals need to know that they're okay to act on the data and the analytics that they're given. It's okay to deviate from the land of 1,000 spreadsheets where you're doing bottom-up, I guess assumption-based modeling, and use more statistical-based machine learning approaches to suggest what the action should be. But individuals need to be okay that it's, or given the okay to use that. From an analytics production perspective, you really need to have the competency within the organization. A lot of people are doing analytics within FP&A, within supply chain, within customer, and they may not be part of an analytics competency. So defining training for them, making sure that they have a dotted line to somebody who they can use to get exposure, experience from a training perspective, from a best practices, and really driving that overall organizational piece is going to be key. We'll get to that in a little more detail as well. And then the analytics consumption. You can have the best models in the world, but if you're not lining it up to be consumed properly, no one's ever going to make an action on it. So this gets, again, making sure that you're defining that business problem. But I think the key piece from an organizational structure perspective is if you really want to embed it, you have to measure results and measure results against value. When you're setting up an analytics priority, a project, whether it's a large project, small project, establishing what the expected value is going to be, what the metrics of success are going to be, is critical in order to not only measure value from an early experiment perspective, but also to continue to measure value as you look throughout the life of the solution, so that you can get the justification to scale, etc., as you go through it. There's a lot more detail in here. Again, I think these slides are going to be made available. So this one has a lot of detail, so I'll spend a little bit of time talking to it. The path to realizing value from an analytics perspective really looks at three different areas: the why, the how, and the what. The why is really defining the purpose, the vision, and for a lot of organizations, the purpose may be for analytics specifically to grow revenue, to change how they're operating. The why should also be aligned to the why of the company. So why is the company, the organization in place? It's not just to grow profit. It's to deliver solutions or services or products that are needed in the market to make people's lives better, etc. So making sure you're aligning the analytics purpose with the organizational purpose is critical there. The how is maybe the detailed piece here that you can see. And there's really 7 key elements that we typically focus on when trying to make sure that an analytics organization is maturing in the right way or being established properly or continuing to drive value. So the first piece around the operating model, this gets to alignment with the business. So whether the company is operating in silos, whether it's well integrated, the analytics organization needs to make sure that they're embedded within and facilitating across all of these different business domains for various reasons. A lot of the times the data can be leveraged across. A lot of the times the decisions that are being made by one organization will impact another. So as you're looking at different analytics projects, you really need to make sure and understand that that group is leveraging the talents and the knowledge of the organization. And so depending on the size of your organization and the amount that you're willing to go deep in the analytics space, maybe you don't need data scientists sitting within every single group. If you have a data scientist sitting in a group that's just developing forecasts, after a little while they may run out of really intellectually stimulating problems to solve. Maybe things become more of a sustain. And so we've seen a lot of instances where a group tries to embed analytics, maybe within FP&A. They go out, they hire a data scientist, and it's great. Early on, the data scientist is expensive, and by the end of it, a couple years in, maybe a year in, they're developing dashboards, they're producing Excel sheets to support just normal business, and they're really not leveraging the data scientist's abilities anymore. They end up leaving or moving throughout the organization, but it's really not the strategic approach to using analytics that we've seen successful. The target portfolio kind of bleeds in with the value measurement for items 2 and 3. It's important to have a portfolio of projects from an analytics perspective, and this can be cross-business domain or within a silo, etc. But setting that up and making sure that they're prioritized properly and prioritized against the company strategy, prioritized against the value, and also taking into account, what's the complexity to solve the problem, what's the willingness of an individual to act, and having key criteria in order to prioritize these portfolio of projects is critical. And so just like many projects are prioritized within a company, the analytics projects should be treated the same. They should be scrutinized. And there are a lot of times where we'll be talking to clients, they'll want to do a project to prove out the use of analytics, but there's really no value behind it. That even if we were to find or predict what they want to predict, they may be able to save a rounding error at the end of the day from a budget perspective, or they might be able to grow revenue by a fraction of a percent within one small market, and it's just not the justification or not the low-hanging fruit to really start. There are a lot of cases where the value measurement is key, not only from an initial setup perspective, but also while you're executing an analytics project. So we said experiment. As you're going through an experiment, it's critical that if it doesn't look like it's going to produce value, you should most likely fail fast. You can learn a lot from it. You can identify maybe data quality issues. You can identify reasons why it failed. Maybe you identified new problems that you weren't aware of that might be able to be solved. But measuring value from a portfolio and from a project perspective is critical. The last piece gets into talent from this first row of items, and the talent aspect of it is important. It's not about just going out and hiring a very smart or bright individual. You really need to look at the different personas that you want within an organization. Do you need somebody who's going to tell a story with data? A lot of problems can be answered with descriptive analytics, using dashboards, getting the right data together, getting the right data in the right person's hand. You may not need a big data architect. You may not need a data scientist. So understanding the talent that needs to be hired now in order to produce, or the talent that you can also harness from within your organization. I'm sure if you go throughout a company, you're going to find people who are learning this stuff at night or are piloting things on their own time to really try to incrementally improve their business and their operations. So finding the talent that exists within the company and harnessing it aligned to the right personas makes sense for a lot of industries and a lot of companies to do. And so the talent piece is important from an initial setup perspective. It also is important from a scalability perspective. A lot of companies are leveraging talent from local universities, U of M, Oakland, Wayne State, etc. They have programs, master's programs in these space. So trying to maybe get involved with the university so that you can have students, help you to drive the agenda is one approach that we've seen some organizations go towards in order to scale and get some talent. It also sets up a very nice approach from a hiring perspective. The data, the need for well-governed and managed data is critical. I think one thing we would advocate is, you may not need to stand up a data lake and get every single data element in your organization in there immediately and then realize value from it. When we say experiment and scale, really what we're talking about is not only from an analytics project perspective, but also from a data perspective, from a technology perspective. It's important to understand what data may be needed to support business decisions, to support solutions that are being developed. And so it's important to fit the data for purpose, fit the technology for purpose, and make sure you're able to scale and grow. So you need to have a strategy around how you intend to do that. But you don't need to spend years cleaning, getting all the data ready, getting all the data in there. By the time you do that, your company may be onto the next ERP, your company may be onto the next, etc. And so you're going to start right over. It also can be time consuming. So it's important to parallel track a lot of these items. The technology is important. The technology is important from a data management perspective, from a modeling perspective, a visualization, consumption perspective. Again, there's a lot of different technologies that can be critical and can be used. Let's use visualization, for example. A lot of companies want to know, what visualization tool is best for my organization. We want one, and the answer may not be that you need one. Maybe it's that you want to have a priority one where you support training on, where you have web-based or server-based solutions deployed on. But if there's a specific use case for a niche focus that requires the use of one visualization tool over another, it's not a bad thing to let them do that, to give them some flexibility. And different departments may have different skill sets, so trying to harness around one may be right, but most companies, I'm sure some of you can relate, you have access to pretty much any tool out there, or can get it on a small scale at least. So really trying to make sure that you're using technology the smartest way and getting around a core set of competencies, but allowing flexibility. The last piece, the knowledge and change, is critical for the how and kind of rounds it out. So knowledge management and organizational change. So knowledge management, there's a couple pieces to this. One of the key ones just worth mentioning is around making sure that individuals throughout the organization are aware of the capability of analytics, of how it's improving the business, and how it can be leveraged and used. So, for example, we've done a project that we'll highlight here shortly where we helped a manufacturing plant for an automotive OEM understand the right mix of permanent and part-time workers to optimize the assembly line from a downtime, quality, cost perspective. And we did it for one plant, right? But that problem around optimizing the value with the right mix of talent is a problem that's not unique to this plant, right? There's a lot of plants in the area that are manufacturing different things. So making sure that knowledge around what was the solution here, what was the approach is taken and scaled, not only to industrialize a solution, but scaled throughout the organization. And so with the right knowledge management, that can happen. And organizational change, it really gets to the culture piece, making sure that the organization knows that they can act upon this information, that they know how to use analytics. We frequently will help companies set up analytics organizations, deliver specific projects in different areas that we have expertise. And a lot of the times, the company has an analytics organization, but they don't know how to use them, or they don't know that they have capacity. They think they have a very unique skill set. So making sure that if there is an analytics organization, or if there are people who are supporting this initiative within the company, that throughout the organization they know how to use them, they know what their skill sets and limitations are, and you know how to harness the value from them. The last is in the what. I think that's a little more tactical, but ongoing management and strategy, it's really what they're doing and how they're achieving it is the bigger piece of this. The next item here is what we would advocate and what we talk about, I guess maybe scaling as you go. So the left side of this is just a visual representation of the 7 elements we talked about. The right side of this really is talk about executing use cases to feed the left side. So define what you want your talent to be, what you think your portfolio is in the beginning, what your operating model might be, but until you start executing use cases, you're not going to know if that works for your organization. The best strategy in the world, you're never going to know until you get on the ground and start executing, because you may think that, yeah, sales and marketing is willing to change. We're going to start up a COE underneath them. But once you get in there, once you start executing use cases, there may be reasons why that doesn't work. Or maybe there's data limitations that you don't know about. So really funneling the demand management, executing projects, and feeding the real world feedback into the strategy in order to grow is going to be critical for the success. This gets into a little more detail on the value management. There's going to be qualitative and quantitative measures that you're going to want to make sure that you're assessing against. And this is for a portfolio, for a project. Speed to benefits capture. This gets to when you're asking the question, when you're trying to define the business problem, the metrics, etc., making sure that there's a clear path to value for the company. Performance improvement, are we gaining efficiency? Sometimes process efficiency can be hard to quantify. You may not be intending to reduce headcount. Maybe you're trying to reprioritize time. So maybe, I'll just continue with a financial forecast. Maybe rather than taking 7 days to do a bottoms-up Excel assumption-based, you want to pre-seed a forecast with a predictive model. And so the efficiency is going to be, reduction in initial time, and you're not going to, maybe you repurpose the people versus trying to reduce heads. And so some of the process efficiency can be hard to do, but can still be quantified. Improved controls, innovation and learning, business insights, improved talent management. These become maybe a little more quantitative or qualitative factors. Just making sure that you're measuring all the value around analytics, around the project, around the organization is going to be critical. These are 6 items that we commonly talk about. I'm sure that there are more, but really just defining what your categories for value are going to be and making sure that you're assessing against them is going to be critical. And in the center of it, it's building a culture of analytics. Again, change management's key. Driving the message to the organization is going to be critical. If you've ever talked to EY about analytics, I'm sure you've seen this. It's a common practice, I think, at this point. But a lot of companies still start left to right, start with the data, figure out what analytics you can do, and then determine what you think the improvement's going to be. So we have a lot of data on customer purchasing. Okay, well, maybe we can build propensity models. Great, what do we think the value is going to be? Versus going to the end and saying, what problems do we have that we think we can solve? Where are growth areas that we think we can define? And then working backwards to say, okay, what data do we have and what analytics are needed to solve the business problem? The reason we say start at the right is because if you're trying to identify problems, if you're trying to identify value to make the company grow, then go back and see, do I have the data that's needed to support the business? Because you already have a compelling story as to why the data is important, why the analytics are needed, and this will help with the change management. You're going to somebody within the business who needs to act on something. They're going to be incentivized to make sure that it's a success. They'll be incentivized to act on it, and they're going to know more about the metrics that matter, right? And so start on the far right. What are we trying to do? And then work your way backwards in order to determine the data and the analytics that are needed. We can talk about analytics maturity models for hours, right? I think everybody's probably seen 100 different versions of it. But the other key piece of this is you don't need to do machine learning or AI because it's a buzzword or because it's cool. Maybe it's good for internal marketing and awareness of yourself within the company. It might be good from that perspective, but quite honestly, you can solve a lot of problems without going deep into that space. So really assessing, again, the business problem, what is warranted for it. We get calls from clients quite often that want to do machine learning. And so it's critical to, if that really is something that you need to do within the organization to drive the change, it's critical that we find the business problems that need that. Because a lot of the case, again, it's about getting the right information in the right person's hand to make the decision. And that information may be a predictive model, it may be a chatbot to improve efficiencies, but it also may be, a simple dashboard that highlights metrics or is just a trending of downtime for plant operations so that they can see how they're performing. Or it's just an indicator that a supplier's late on a shipment. This is kind of the framework that we use to drive that. So when we advocate to our clients to start with the business problem, there's a few things from an approach summary perspective: prioritizing areas of focus, define key questions, hypotheses, and define the analysis for the insights. And so when we go through this, one example I'll go through in a moment, we were helping a manufacturing plant that I mentioned before try to understand what the right mix of permanent and contingent workers were. And they came to us and they said, we have a problem. We need to determine, our problem is that we don't know what the right mix is, and we want costs to be reduced. And so we said, okay, kept going through and churning with them, and we found out that there's probably 50 different business problems associated with that. When you get into part-time, full-time, there's a lot of sensitivity in that space. There's also issues that relate to what is the overall employee satisfaction. Maybe you want to reduce costs, but then what's the impact to quality? What's the impact to downtime? What's the impact to safety and overall team morale? And how do you put a quantified value on that? And so rather than just taking a question at face value, it's important to have sessions where you really drive into it and understand what are the very specific questions that need to be answered, but also do those questions have a direct action that can relate to it. So, for example, maybe it's the product complexity is causing downtime issues, it's causing quality issues, and so can a plant really impact product complexity? Maybe they can indirectly, maybe they can't, depending on the organization. So when you go through some of these, just make sure that maybe that's an example of a question that gets elevated to a different level, but making sure that there are people that can be able to act on it is critical. And that gets into the third piece around the decision and actions, and then quantifiable results, making sure that anything that's being done can be measured. Because at the end of the day, like most projects, you're going to have to justify the value for it. This is something I'm just going to glance over, but at the end of the day, I think the key point here, and at the top, it's just a bunch of different business domains, and within it are specific solutions or problems that we commonly see at clients. This is focused on automotive. I'm based out of Detroit. I work in a lot of automotive clients, OEM and supplier, as well as transportation. But there's a ton of different problems that exist where analytics can be applied. I think that everybody is probably aware that analytics can be applied to most problems at this point. So just doing a time check here. So we have a couple case studies that I want to just walk through and kind of show how analytics can be applied and how we walk through the process with our clients. This is the one on the plant operations. And so the OEM in this case, they're manufacturing multiple vehicles at this plant, and they had a real problem, cost pressures from above, but also they wanted to have the right mix of permanent and contingent workers. With unemployment dropping, they were having a substantial issue with retention on the temporary worker, whereas permanent workers were locked in. They believed that they drove more value. They also were longer-term employees, which they valued as well. But the cost for a permanent worker is approximately 2 to 3x the cost for a temporary worker. So when cost pressures come, it's very easy that's a logical place, get to lower cost if possible. However, with training costs, with the belief that it lowers team morale, and with overall issues and complexity, they really needed more seasoned individuals there. So we leverage a lot of different techniques in order to do this, and then this is a good case study because it uses these different techniques. So we're able to start off with exploring the data and trying to visualize, why are you experiencing more downtime for job A versus job B? Or why are you experiencing more downtime caused by job A when you're running your A shift versus your B shift? What's the difference in the shifts, and just some general trends that we were seeing in it to help shape the model. We were able to let the data tell us how best to segment. And so from that perspective, what I mean is, the right mix for the assembly line is probably not the right mix for every single job. Some jobs are easier than others, right? So some jobs, maybe it's a great idea to use temporary workers versus other jobs which are more complicated and require a more seasoned individual. So we're able to understand the right mix of it. Is it a group level, a specific job, or is it the whole floor? The other thing we were able to do is, they said they wanted to reduce cost, but at the end of the day, to reduce cost, the impact at least on this was, the quality was already in pretty good control. The downtime was happening, but it wasn't overly substantial. They were meeting their production numbers as a result. Their efficiency was good, etc. So really what it came to was not just looking at cost, but trying to find a way to balance the cost with the importance of metrics such as downtime per day, such as quality incidents per day, etc. So we developed an optimization model that leveraged 60 or so underlying regression models targeting each one of these variables for each one of the groups, and pulled it all together to essentially balance it and say, if you care about quality and downtime as much as you care about cost, as much as you care about total production, then here's the right mix for every single group on the floor, for every single shift, so that they can make a decision that wasn't solely focused on cost or solely focused on downtime, so that it didn't have negative impacts in one area or the other. At the end of the day, I think the true benefit of this was around, what's the potential value? So the potential value here was reducing quality defects by 30%, downtime by 35%, turnover by 30%, and an increase in cost by 1%. So cost is going to go up, right? The end suggestion was you needed more permanent in some cases, but a lot of the indirect cost savings from quality and downtime took over or outweighed the direct cost from a people perspective. And so rather than going in and just saying, how do I reduce cost, what do I do? It would have said, shift a lot of work to the lower cost or lower skilled teams. This really looked at and said, before you do that, you should really think about and balance that. And so in some cases, there were certain groups that said, yeah, you can use lower cost talent here. In other cases, it said, no, this is a very critical set of jobs on the line, and if you go to a lower cost talent, it's been seen that as that overall shift and mix of the workforce changes, it's going to produce downtime that's going to impact the line, and it's going to impact a lot of costs. It's going to cause overtime, you're going to miss production, it's going to cause short shipments to dealers, etc. Another one, which is a common space that we're having conversations with clients on, and a lot of clients are moving towards this, is about using predictive models to enhance either demand or revenue forecasting. Really, we've done it from a demand management perspective. We've done it from a revenue forecasting perspective. From a cash flow perspective, we've helped companies understand what's the daily cash flow they're going to get with a 90-day horizon. So for this quarter, every single day, what do we think our cash inflow is going to be? That can be very difficult to predict in some cases, and so having that information makes them enabled to make better decisions. It can help with working capital management. It can help with a lot of different things. So this example here focused on revenue units, so really sales units. And if you take a look at this graph, so the green line is actuals, the blue line being the forecast, and the orange line being the current forecast that they were doing. We were able to prove to this client that within a matter of seconds, the models that we developed can be executed in order to produce a much more accurate forecast. We were able to take them, I think, from average monthly error of 25% down to 2%. And so when we're working with clients on this, this gets to the human element in some cases here. So there's a lot of human bias in forecasts, and if you're leveraging historical beliefs that everything's going to be good tomorrow, then maybe your sales forecast is too high. Maybe you're not adapting quick enough. Maybe the sales team really believes they're going to achieve their targets, and if that's one of your key inputs to it, you might be a little high biased. Or maybe you were impacted by downturns, and you still are a little conservative, so you might be low. So the good thing about using the predictive models in this case is it gives you an unbiased starting point. It uses the data, it uses historical patterns, it uses a lot of external factors around industry trends. It may use some economic factors depending on how far out you're looking, as well as some internal data points around sales pipeline. Maybe it's a good predictor, etc. But it gives the organization a starting point. So if you look at the bottom, the objective was to enhance timing as well as accuracy, and so this organization spent a lot of time developing their forecast. It would take them 2-3 weeks to just get an initial starting point, and then they would sit there and churn and iterate on it essentially until the deadline for when they met with the board to talk about it. And so you could say it was a 45-day cycle that they went through every time. Some of it was just churning and putting beliefs in it, but really what this does is it gives you that unbiased starting point again that's using data to drive it. So when somebody says, no, I think sales in June need to go up by 30%, you have accuracy metrics and can say, okay, well, based on everything we've ever done, it's never been that high. So what marketing are we doing? What products are being released? You can really challenge the business judgment. But at the end of the day, predictive models are great in some cases, but you can't get away from the business knowledge. If you're releasing a new product into the market, and that's not a data point in the model, it's not going to know that you're releasing it, right? So, or if you're entering a new market, it's a growth area, or if you have a major customer that just went out of business, right? You need to include that human element to it and say, I get it, it's telling me this, but it doesn't have the data to know that this event's going to happen, or it hasn't had enough time to learn from it. These will learn, they will adapt, but you really need to make sure that the human piece of it, the business knowledge, is not forgotten, but it can really drive a great starting point. We ended up developing for this company an 18-month rolling forecast. The other thing, if you're in the finance space, being confined to a fiscal year, 1 + 11, 2 + 10 forecast is great, but you're making decisions beyond the end of the fiscal year. And so when companies are moving to a rolling forecast, maybe 18-month time horizon, this is a great jump start for that, because it can continue to proceed past fiscal years, past budgeting cycles, etc., and can really start to get you down that path. This next one that I just want to touch on briefly is around program and resource demand forecasting, and whether that demand is human resources or capital resources. In the automotive space, building a new vehicle is very expensive and can be very time consuming, whether it's a minor or major overhaul. And so trying to make sure you have the right number of engineers, trying to make sure you have the right facilities in place to test that and to drive it can be challenging and can be very costly. So in this case, we were able to use different types of modeling techniques essentially in order to predict how many individuals are needed to deliver a vehicle program. So do you need, 15 of this type of engineer, 14 of this type of engineer, and when do you need them throughout the life of the program? Do we expect the program to be 4 years, 2 years, 3 years? Regardless of what we expect the typical program to be, what do we expect this one to be? And so it gives you a day one estimate, but also, the machine learning techniques are very good in this space. So whether it's a large IT project, a construction project, a vehicle project, we've done a lot of work across different areas. It really focuses on, validating what maybe the project manager is putting in. And so if you're 3 months in, we can run our predictive models, we can run different machine learning techniques to really learn and say, rather than having somebody snowplow the budget to the end of the year just to understand that they're trying to spend it on things they may not need, let's use real forecasting to understand what do we think the total spend is going to be, when do we think that spend is going to be calendarized, what people do we need and when do we need them, so that maybe we delay programs if we expect there to be a shortfall of specific resources, or maybe we have a strategy around temporary resources that we can ramp up. And so these type of machine learning algorithms, they can get complicated, but if you are spending a lot of money, construction space being maybe a key area as well on building a lot of large buildings, or maybe you're a people shop like a consulting company, and you need to make sure you're forecasting the right number of heads you need to deliver, aligning this with something that includes predicting the portfolio of projects can really get to a very streamlined approach to managing heads and questioning what the bottoms-up numbers give you. And this is similar in concept to the financial forecasting, much different techniques, but really it gets to giving a good starting point, giving a good justification for what do we think the spend is going to be, what do we think the people demand is going to be in order to improve operations. This next one is around IT projects, similar to the one before on the techniques and such. I think this one, whereas the company, the key here from a value perspective, the company was forecasting around a 24% error around what they thought the spend was going to be for different IT projects in aggregate. And the predictive model got it down to, it looked like it was a little under forecasting by 2% on average. And obviously on average is good because things are netting out, but that absolute error should be measured as well. So making sure that you're not too far off month to month, because you want to make sure that you're spending in the periods, and it may fall over budget cycles and such. But again, another application of it is really looking at large program spend and making sure that the forecast is appropriate so that you're not blowing budget, so that you're utilizing people and resources as appropriate. This next one is a little different, and it looks at the use of facilities for testing. I think that we've kind of gotten into this in a little depth, but this one was interesting. So the company uses different facilities to test their product before it goes to launch, and so depending on what programs are coming down the flight, depending on what the type of programs they are, they need different facilities to test different components. And the connection between the team building the product and testing the product, and then using the facilities who manage that, it wasn't a very streamlined process. So really the key here was trying to use analytics to almost bring down some of the walls between the organizations so that the facility management team really had a good idea of what was going to be needed. But I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and skip over that. So that kind of sums up, I think I went back. Yeah. So that kind of sums up what we wanted to go through. I know we sped through some of this just in the interest of time. Again, I think these materials will be made available for everybody. But again, really focusing on if you're going down the path or the journey of analytics, making sure that you're asking the right questions and you're fitting the analytics for purpose. So I will stop then. I think we're close or up on time. But if anyone has any questions, we can feel free to take them now, or we can take them, come on up, and I can speak afterwards as well. So, any questions? All good? Good?
Yes,
all right.
Yeah. Slide number 15.
Yep.
Where you have the work stream of product development. This one.
Yeah.
You have R&D and supply chain and customer manufacturing. Why product engineering is not? Have you worked on? You showed 2 examples.
Yeah. So that's a good question, and maybe the part of it is that some of it falls into, I guess we may have bucketed into R&D, but you're right. Yeah, product engineering is critical for it, and if it's not a subset of R&D, it's separate from in a lot of cases.
Because R&D horizon is 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Product engineering, maybe 3
So
years.
yeah.
I guess.
Mm-hmm. 3 to 5, yeah,
So,
maybe shorter. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those examples are from the product engineering side of it. Yep. Yeah. I'm sure there's more than what's up here. There's a lot of different areas that it can be. I think these are some of the common ones. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Hopefully this was good, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.